On New Year's Eve, Ethan Moore brought his son to spend the holiday with his white moonlight love, Grace Lang. The three of them sat together around the year-end reunion dinner, then took photos of the fireworks and posted them on social media. Friends began liking the post one after another and leaving comments. Someone asked, puzzled, "That's strange, why hasn't Kelly reacted at all?" Another commented, "Normally, the moment she sees something like this, she'd be calling and blowing up his phone." Ethan Moore didn't pay it much mind. He said indifferently, "Just wait a bit, she'll call soon." But when the clock hand crossed over to midnight, his phone still didn't ring. Unable to help himself, he asked aloud, "Kelly, why didn't you call today to urge me to come home?" What he didn't know was that at that very moment, I was already sitting on a train that was pulling away. From now on, there would be no one left to urge him to go home. My leaving happened exactly on New Year's Eve. That evening, Ethan Moore came down from the second floor without sparing even a glance at the fact that I was packing my luggage. As he stepped out the door, he said, "I'm going to the old house to pick up Henry. Before tonight, the two of us will go to Grace Lang's place to celebrate the new year. You don't need to wait for dinner." His tone was the same as always, flat, detached, as if he were merely informing me of something routine. If this had been 2 years ago, I would have exploded and refused to let it go. But this year was different. Perhaps because I was about to leave, I felt an unexpected calm. I answered softly, "Okay." I didn't lift my head, nor did I say another word. Ethan Moore paused slightly, a trace of surprise flashing through his eyes, but he didn't ask anything further. He hurried away, only nodding once before closing the door. The sound of the door shutting wasn't loud, yet my hand still paused for a brief moment. A week earlier, I had seen a post from Grace Lang on social media. She had bought many New Year decorations and stood in front of a glass door covered in bright red patterns, taking a selfie. The caption read, "Another New Year full of anticipation." Many people reacted with hearts, most of them friends of Ethan Moore. Someone commented, "So this year it's still Ethan spending the New Year with you?" Another wrote, "Ethan really treats you so well." Grace Lang didn't reply directly, only sending back a cute reaction. Soon after, Ethan Moore also liked the post. I wasn't surprised by their interactions. After all, this wasn't the first time Ethan Moore had spent the New Year with Grace Lang. To be precise, this was already the 3rd year. But what could I do? Grace Lang was the white moonlight in his heart. Even though Ethan Moore and I had been together since our youth, all the way to the day I put on a wedding dress, in the end, we still couldn't escape the old, worn-out ending of every romance story. When the white moonlight returns, everything that once belonged to me becomes forced and awkward. In the past, I had cried, argued, and grown jealous, speaking in roundabout ways and pressing him to admit whether he wanted to spend the new year with her again. But this year, I didn't ask anything at all. I quietly bought a train ticket back to my hometown and casually left behind a divorce agreement. I thought that what Ethan Moore and I had should end here. The train ticket I booked was for a departure at 7 o'clock that evening. I was still hesitating, unsure whether I should bring along that one and only family photo, when I suddenly received a video call from Henry Moore, my son with Ethan Moore. The boy was 5 years old this year. Perhaps because he had been raised at the old house since he was little, both father and son shared the same cold, composed temperament. As soon as the call connected, his young face appeared on the screen, his eyebrows still childish, yet already showing faint contours identical to Ethan Moore's. Behind him was the familiar interior of a car. It seemed that Ethan Moore had already gone to pick him up. Henry held the phone and looked at me. "Mom, are you mad again? You are, right?" I stared blankly at my son's face through the screen. Before I could answer, he continued, "Is it because Dad brought me to Aunt Grace's place to celebrate the new year? I've told you so many times, Mom. Aunt Grace spends the new year alone. It's really lonely. She's not like you. You have all 365 days of the year. You all have someone by your side." The boy chirped as he explained. In fact, he had already said these exact words to me 2 years ago. That was the first time I found out that Ethan Moore had taken our son to spend New Year's Eve with Grace Lang. I had flown into a rage back then and gotten into a fierce argument with him. At the time, Henry was standing beside his father, and the looks in both father and son's eyes were filled with reproach and dissatisfaction. They said Grace Lang was alone, had no close family, and had returned to the country, hoping only to have a livelier New Year. They asked what was wrong with them going to celebrate with her. I shot back, asking that if they went over there to celebrate the New Year, then what about me? Was I not lonely being all by myself? In truth, Henry didn't usually live with me anyway. He stayed at the old house most of the time, and the amount of time I actually got to spend with my child was pitifully little. When the New Year came, all I wanted was a reunion dinner, the three of us sitting together as a family. Yet in their eyes, I was nothing more than a selfish, unreasonable woman who liked to make trouble. Henry, with the air of a miniature adult, looked at me with eyes full of blame. In the past, just that one look would have been enough to make my heart ache sharply. But now, that feeling of heartbreak was no more than a mosquito bite, slightly itchy. Not nearly enough to be worth my concern. Henry, Mom's not angry. If you like it, then from now on, every year you can let Aunt Grace spend the New Year with you, I said with complete sincerity. The small boy's face froze, his lips pressing tightly together. That's not true, he said. You're always like this. You say you don't care, but when it gets late, you always call right away to urge Dad to come home. I parted my lips about to say something, but Henry had already handed the phone to Ethan Moore. The camera angle shifted and stopped on the man's face. The dim lighting inside the car only made the cold, sharp contours of his features stand out more. His gaze swept briefly over the lens, indifferent and distant, calm as if everything had nothing to do with him at all. I immediately fell silent. Ethan Moore spoke while driving, his tone detached. Anything else? It was the same familiar tone. In the past, I would have had hundreds of things I wanted to say. Now I merely shook my head slightly. No. Ethan Moore seemed to hesitate for a moment, as if he wanted to look at me, but the traffic light had just turned green. Taking advantage of the instant the car began to move, I ended the call. In the end, I didn't take that family photo with me. After packing everything up, I casually placed the key ring on the shoe cabinet by the front door. 6 years of living in this city, and in the end, everything that belonged to me was reduced to a single 26-inch suitcase. The winter cold was biting. A thin, misty layer of frost covered the train window. Before the train departed, the driver turned to chat with me. It's already almost New Year's Eve, and you're only heading out now. Going back to your hometown for the holiday? Yes, this was the only ticket available, I replied. Is your home far? Will you make it back in time for the reunion dinner? He joked with a smile. I could only force a smile in return, half joking myself. I didn't manage to book a ticket earlier. But the truth wasn't like that. I had originally thought that this year I would drive back to my parents' home for the New Year together with Ethan Moore and Henry. Ever since marrying him, I had never returned to my hometown during the spring festival, not once in 6 years. At first, it was because Henry was still young and the long journey was too exhausting. Later, when he turned 3, Ethan Moore spent 2 consecutive years taking him to celebrate the New Year with Grace Lang instead. I had thought that this year, he would remember his promise. But Grace Lang's post on social media reminded me that Ethan Moore had forgotten again. Since that was the case, I stopped expecting anything more. I bought the train ticket myself. I had just booked it too late and had no choice but to take today's departure. The driver dropped me off at the station right at 6:30. I dragged my suitcase through ticket inspection and boarded the train. The city lights had already begun to glow. Along the outer riverbank, people were setting off fireworks, which bloomed brilliantly in the night sky, dazzling and beautiful. This was the first time I had experienced the New Year atmosphere of this city from such a perspective, a viewpoint that felt both unfamiliar. It felt as if a weight in my heart had been lifted just a little. I found myself thinking back to the first 1 or 2 years after I married Ethan Moore. In truth, I had been very happy back then. We had just gotten married, and soon after, Henry was born. The entire Moore family seemed to be wrapped in a bright, cheerful atmosphere, laughter everywhere, a sense of lively joy filling the house. On ordinary days, they were strict and prone to nitpicking me, yet during that period everyone wore smiles. Their gazes softened, and even their words became far less sharp than before. But when did everything start to change? It was probably from the moment the Moore family insisted that Henry be brought back to live at the old house. From then on, every month I had to call ahead and ask for permission before I was allowed to see my own child. The home I had once carefully arranged, bit by bit, was eventually left with only two people, Ethan Moore and me. We went from being a close-knit couple who shared everything, to two people living under the same roof, while our hearts no longer faced the same direction. Little by little, I lost hope. Throughout the entire year, the only thing I looked forward to, aside from the brief moments when allowed to see my son, was the new year. Because I believed that, at least on that day, I would be able to spend uninterrupted time with Henry. Yet my child, though raised to be well-mannered and polite, always felt distant from me. There was a sense of unfamiliarity between us. I once thought it was simply because we saw each other too rarely. It wasn't until I saw with my own eyes how close he was with Grace Lang that I finally understood. Between people, there are bonds called fate and affinity. Blood ties alone do not automatically make people close. I scrolled past Ethan Moore's New Year's Eve post on social media. Just like every other year, there were photos of the reunion dinner, photos of fireworks, and a picture of the three of them, Ethan Moore, Henry, and Grace Lang. In the photo, Grace Lang looked gentle and composed. Henry was bright and adorable, and even Ethan Moore, who always wore a cold, detached expression, showed a trace of warmth, a faint smile sketched at the corner of his lips. I suddenly thought of the family photo I hadn't brought with me, the most recent one, taken on Henry's birthday last year. In that picture, I was the only one smiling. Ethan Moore and our son were not. At the time, they explained that they simply didn't like smiling when taking photos. I hadn't doubted it, because Henry had always taken after his father, calm, reserved, with few expressions, and Ethan Moore himself had never been someone who smiled easily. But looking back at that photo tonight, all I felt rising in my heart was a vague, muted emotion. A thought suddenly crossed my mind. Should I tap the like button on his post? But then my gaze stopped at the comments below. The post had been up for less than half an hour, yet there were already quite a few congratulatory messages. Some people, unaware of the real situation, even assumed the three of them were truly a happy family and left wishes for lasting happiness. A few comments from Ethan Moore's friends made me pause. So Ethan's spending New Year's with Grace again? Doesn't Kelly have any objections? That's strange. It's already been half an hour and Kelly still hasn't said anything. Normally, she'd have called and made a big fuss by now. Among them, Ethan Moore had even replied with a single line. Wait a bit longer. She'll call soon. I froze, remembering Henry's video call earlier that evening. He had said that I always spoke the opposite of what I meant, saying I didn't care, but when it got late, I would always call to urge his father and him to come home. Indeed, if this had been in the past, I would have already called. Already messaged Ethan Moore to hurry up, eat quickly, and bring our son home. In truth, back then, there was only one thing I wanted to say to Henry, that I wasn't speaking against my own heart. This year, I wouldn't call anymore. And from now on, there would no longer be any calls urging them to come home. Seeing Ethan Moore's comment, I withdrew my intention to press like. I was afraid that if he saw it, he would think I was deliberately hinting at something. I turned off my phone. Amid the gentle rocking of the train, I replayed the years I had shared with Ethan Moore, while silently calculating how much longer it would be before I arrived. People only truly understand certain things once they leave. Only after leaving did so many emotions begin to surface. I thought back to the very beginning between him and me, from the time he transferred schools in our junior year of high school to when we were both accepted into the same university. I had loved him silently throughout those years in high school and college. He was the kind of person who naturally drew everyone's attention, born into a prominent family, outstanding academic performance, an exceptional appearance. Everything about him stood out. As for me, just to get into the university he chose, I had already pushed myself to complete exhaustion. I watched quietly as he and Grace Lang fell passionately in love, then broke up. I never once dared to imagine that there would come a day when he would notice me. But fate is something that works in mysterious ways. One day, it suddenly opens a door for someone who has been loving in silence. Even now, I still remember that day clearly, the day Ethan Moore discovered my feelings. At that time, Grace Lang had already gone abroad for half a year. Ethan Moore took part in a competition that no one thought much of. No one believed he could win. Only I firmly believed that he would. In the end, he took first place. When the cheers and congratulations finally died down, Ethan Moore suddenly walked toward me. "Kelly," he called out, "I heard you were the first person to bet that I would win." He had just won the prize, and the lingering glow of success still clung to every line of his face, making him look radiant and dazzling. I didn't dare meet his eyes, and only replied softly, "I just believed in you." Ethan Moore smiled faintly. "I've seen you many times before. It seems that every time there's something like this, you're always there." I froze. In fact, I had gone many times in secret, but I had never dared to get close to him. I only hid among the crowd, a nameless spectator amid the sea of cheering voices. I had thought I concealed it well. I never expected that while I was looking at him, my heart racing and my lips sealed, he had already noticed. He didn't say anything more, just looked at me in silence, his dark eyes carrying a gentle hint of amusement that threw my heart into complete disarray. When Ethan Moore and I started dating, everyone was stunned. Upon hearing my name, most people's first reaction was, "Who? How could I possibly compare to Grace Lang?" She was the talented prodigy of the School of Arts, whose freshman year piano performance had shocked the entire campus. She and Ethan Moore were a match made in heaven, talent and beauty perfectly paired, admired by all. It was just a pity that they had fate but no future. Grace Lang chose to study abroad for her career, and Ethan Moore, heartbroken at the time, collapsed and had to be hospitalized for treatment. Everyone thought he would never recover from that blow. Who could have imagined that only half a year later, he would end up with someone like me, an utterly ordinary nobody, and then walk straight from the campus into a wedding hall? People said Ethan Moore must have been possessed. Otherwise, how could he have chosen someone like me? These words continued to echo even after I gave birth to his son, Henry Moore, and they didn't stop until Grace Lang returned. I could almost picture the looks of regret and emotion on their faces, as if I were the supporting female character blocking the main storyline in a drama. Now that the true female lead had returned, the obstacles should naturally be cleared away. At 12:01, I was startled awake by the sound of fireworks outside. The new year had arrived. Inside the train car, some people were moving about, others speaking softly on the phone, telling their families they were safe. The phone under my pillow vibrated. It was Ethan Moore. To be honest, I was a little surprised. In past years, at this hour, he was always with Henry and Grace Lang, celebrating New Year's Eve amid lively fireworks. Logically, he wouldn't have had the time to think of me. Yet today, he was calling. Had something happened to Henry? I hurriedly pressed the answer button. "Hello." On the other end of the line, there was only the sound of breathing. I thought it was because of a poor signal and was about to speak up to ask again when Ethan Moore's low voice came through the line. "Are you asleep?" I immediately sensed that he had something he wanted to say, but what surprised me even more was that today, for once, he didn't get straight to the point like he always did. Instead, he was circling around it like this. "Is there something going on?" I lowered my voice, afraid of disturbing the other people in the carriage. Ethan Moore fell silent for a moment, then I heard him ask, "It's already past midnight. Why didn't you call me?" Why would I need to call him? For a brief moment, I was slightly taken aback. Then I immediately understood. It was because of that social media post. How strange. In previous years, Ethan Moore had hated it the most when I called to urge him to come home. Even Henry had once said that just hearing my ringtone was enough to ruin his New Year mood. Yet this year, when I didn't call, he was the one bringing it up. Since that was the case, I didn't see any reason not to answer honestly. I didn't want to ruin everyone's good mood, so I didn't call, I said, speaking from the heart. But Ethan Moore only fell silent for even longer. It was only after I stopped loving Ethan more that I realized how much of my time spent on him had truly been a waste. Is there anything else? If not, I'm gonna hang up. There is something, he said. Henry wants to wish you a happy new year. Henry was really strange this year. In previous years, he would be so busy playing that I wouldn't see him at the old house until the third day of the new year. Only then would he suddenly remember to say a New Year's greeting to me. Yet this year, he was sending his wishes right on time. By all logic, seeing Henry grow up and become more considerate should have made me happy and touched. But for some reason deep down, I felt an unusual calm, no ripples at all. As a result, even my reply sounded perfunctory. Thank you. I wish you a happy new year too. The signal on the other end seemed unstable. The sound came and went, cutting in and out, and I assumed it was because of weak reception. I was about to hang up to be done with it when, at that moment, Ethan Moore suddenly spoke again. Kelly, wait. After we finish visiting relatives at the old house, Henry and I will take you to an amusement park. An amusement park. I was briefly startled, because I suddenly remembered that this was something I had mentioned a long time ago. It wasn't that I was particularly eager for rides or games. I had simply wanted to take that opportunity to grow closer to my son and make up for the affection I owed him. But Ethan Moore was always busy, and Henry always said amusement parks were childish and didn't want to go. I waited and waited, postponed it again, and the plan never came to fruition. That was until one day when I accidentally saw a post from Grace Lang. Only then did I understand, it wasn't that they didn't have time, nor was it that they found amusement parks boring. They had already gone. It was just that the person they wanted to go with wasn't me. I don't need it, I said. Between them and me, there was nothing left that needed nurturing anymore. An amusement park no longer held any meaning for me either. What did you say? Ethan Moore asked. The train had just rushed through a tunnel, and the noise swallowed my reply. I was about to repeat myself when the phone suddenly picked up another sound. A soft female voice came through. Ethan, hurry over here. Henry's waiting for you to set off fireworks. The voice sounded distant at first, then grew closer with each word. It was Grace Lang. I was far too familiar with her voice, especially over the past 2 years. We had crossed paths too many times, to the point that her voice seemed etched deep into my bones. She seemed to have noticed that Ethan Moore was on the phone and spoke up deliberately. You're on a call? Is that Kelly? Calling again to urge the two of you to go home? Grace Lang continued softly. Well, that makes sense. It's late already. You two should head back early, or Kelly will worry. Her voice hesitated slightly. I could almost picture her at that moment, her delicate brows faintly knit, her eyes shimmering with gentle concern. It's just that. Henry also said he wants to eat the steamed eggs you make tomorrow morning. Ethan Moore was still holding the phone. Grace Lang's voice gradually faded, while I had already lost any interest in eavesdropping on their conversation. I ended the call decisively, saying anything more would be pointless. Tomorrow, when Ethan Moore returned, he would realize that I was gone. By then, he would understand what I meant. Still, thinking about it, I couldn't help feeling a trace of curiosity. If Ethan Moore found out that I had left, would he remain indifferent, not caring at all? Or would he think that I had finally done what I should have done long ago? For a long time now, Grace Lang's sudden appearances had been interrupting my calls with Ethan Moore at crucial moments. At that instant, a vague sense of irritation toward Grace Lang rose in Ethan Moore's heart. She didn't know that he had been waiting all evening for Kelly's call. Because in previous years, if he and Henry hadn't returned by this hour, Kelly would never sit still. She would call countless times, send countless messages, even keep video calling, determined to urge him to end the reunion dinner with Grace Lang and bring their son home. But this year, 4 hours had passed since he posted on social media. It was already past midnight, yet Kelly hadn't made a single call, hadn't even sent one message. This wasn't normal. From half an hour after that post went up, a sense of unease had already begun to creep into Ethan Moore's heart, and as time went on, it grew clearer, making him increasingly restless. It had taken real effort for him to find an excuse to call Kelly to wish her a happy new year after the clock struck midnight. Yet before he could say much, Grace Lang had interrupted. Though he didn't show it on the surface, irritation had already taken root inside him. When he heard Kelly mention that Henry wanted to eat the steamed eggs she made, it was clearly a subtle reminder for him to take their son home. But Grace Lang kept insisting, trying to keep the two of them there. In truth, Ethan Moore didn't want to stay. He wanted to take their son home as soon as possible to see Kelly again. By now, she was probably still waiting at home, just like every other year. No matter how late it was, Kelly would always sit and wait, just to say one New Year's greeting and hand him the carefully prepared New Year's gift. He wondered what she had prepared this year. Just thinking about it made his heart soften, a faint sense of anticipation rising within him. He wanted to take his son home immediately. But Henry was excited, playing happily and unwilling to leave. "I'm not going home. I want to sleep with Aunt Grace," the boy said, clinging tightly to Grace Lang and refusing to let go. Grace Lang coaxed him gently while pleading, "Ethan, let Henry stay here for one night. My place has plenty of rooms anyway. You're worried Kelly might misunderstand? It's okay, I'll explain it to her together with you." She looked up at him, her gaze as gentle as water. "Besides, it's not safe to drive back this late." Yeah, Henry chimed in excitedly. "You just need to tell Mom, that's all." Looking at the child he had with Kelly, Ethan Moore finally softened. "Then you have to send your mom a message," he said. "Tomorrow after breakfast we'll go home." "Okay," Henry agreed happily, picking up the phone and sending Kelly a sweet voice message. But Kelly didn't reply. The unease in Ethan Moore's heart grew stronger and stronger. Even so, he didn't think too deeply about it. He only assumed that she was probably angry and had gone to sleep. He decided that tomorrow he would return a little earlier and bring her a New Year's gift while he was at it. After all, Kelly had always been gentle and soft-hearted. Even if she was upset, she was easy to comfort. He had already planned it all out in his mind. But the next morning, before he even had a chance to return home, Ethan Moore received a call from the old house. An elder there told him to bring Henry back to pay New Year's visits. "All right, I'll stop by to pick up Kelly first," he replied. "Pick her up for what? The person Mother wants to see isn't her." His mother's voice rang out over the phone, her tone clearly filled with dislike and irritation. Ethan Moore knew that his mother had never liked Kelly. The reason wasn't anything particularly deep, just that Kelly's background didn't match the Moore family's status. But the one living with Kelly was him, not his mother. He loved Kelly, so he didn't care about those things. "Mom, no matter what, she's still your daughter-in-law. She's the mother of your grandson. It's the new year. How could you not invite her home?" He couldn't help but argue back. Mrs. Moore gave a cold laugh. "I don't see her treating herself like a daughter-in-law anyway. She doesn't want to come back to the old house. I'm not forcing her." Thinking about it carefully, that was indeed true. Kelly knew very well that her mother-in-law disliked her, and with the past arguments over Henry living at the old house, the number of times she returned to visit had been pitifully few. Even when she did go back, it was only to see her son. The old lady wasn't happy to see her either. Ethan Moore frowned slightly, feeling a headache coming on. "I'll call Kelly first," he said. "If she doesn't want to come back to the old house either, I won't force it." Ethan Moore called Kelly, but she didn't answer. Mrs. Moore continued urging him on the other end of the phone, saying that all the relatives had already arrived and the house was full of people. With no other choice, Ethan Moore left Kelly a message. At the old house, there were guests everywhere. As the heir and head of this generation of the Moore family, Ethan Moore couldn't avoid having to entertain everyone one by one. On top of that, Henry was very popular with the elders. Once he returned to the old house, he played to his heart's content, and ended up staying all the way until the 4th day of the new year. Throughout that entire time, Kelly didn't reply to a single one of his messages or calls. Eventually, the sense that something was off in Ethan Moore's heart completely turned into a strong, gnawing unease. On the afternoon of the 4th day, after seeing all the relatives off, he ignored his mother's attempts to keep him, and immediately took Henry back to the small house he shared with Kelly. The moment he opened the door, darkness and silence rushed in. Ethan Moore stood in the entryway and frowned. Something was wrong. No matter how late he usually came home, Kelly would always leave a light on for him. But now the entire house was plunged into darkness, no lights, not a single glimmer. "Mom." Henry ran up to the master bedroom and didn't see anyone. The boy stood at the top of the stairs, looking back at his father in confusion. "Dad, Mom's not home. Where did she go?" Ethan Moore's fingers turned icy cold, a chill running straight up his spine. His eyes swept quickly across the rooms. Everything was too quiet, so quiet it gave the unsettling feeling that the owner of this place had left a long time ago. From every corner of the empty house, a bone-deep cold seemed to seep out, wrapping around his entire body. I saw the missed calls from Ethan Moore on the night of the 4th day, 21 consecutive calls without stopping. The urgency in each ring made it feel as though something very serious had happened. I called back, and the other end picked up immediately. "Hello, Kelly, where did you go?" Ethan Moore's voice was hoarse, sounding exhausted. I didn't know if it was just my imagination, but I sensed a trace of hesitation in his question. I thought for a moment, then asked back, "You're home already?" "Yes." It wasn't surprising. He must have panicked when he got home and didn't see me, which was why he called like that. Calling this many times, it seemed he had already seen the divorce agreement I left behind. "I went back to my mom's place," I replied. He asked again, "Then when are you coming back?" I paused, slightly surprised. He had already seen the divorce papers, yet he was still asking that question. Did he really not understand what I meant? "I'm not coming back," I said. "If you don't understand, then let me make it clear. Ethan Moore, I'm not going back anymore. Sign the divorce agreement. Let's end this peacefully." "End it peacefully? What do you mean, peacefully, Kelly?" His voice suddenly sharpened. "Aren't we doing just fine?" So it turned out that in Ethan Moore's heart, days like that were what he considered just fine. A slow wave of bitterness rose in my chest. I let out a soft sigh. He seemed to sense something and asked, "Is it because I took Henry to spend the new year with Grace?" "Why would it be because of that?" Ethan Moore pressed on. I had never been someone who questioned him repeatedly about reasons, so I replied quietly. That answer seemed to further confirm the suspicion in his mind. "Kelly, how many times have I told you already? Between Grace and me, it's not what you think." "Ethan Moore," I cut him off coldly. "What's between you and Grace Lang doesn't concern me. I only know that I want a divorce." The other end of the line choked up and fell into silence. I spoke plainly. "If you haven't signed the divorce papers yet, don't call me again." My sleep, shattered by Ethan Moore's call, wouldn't come back. I sat up and went downstairs to the dining area to get some water, only to find my mom still busy in the kitchen. "Mom, it's so late. Why are you still up?" "I'm making you a little late-night snack," she replied, carrying out a steaming bowl of egg noodles and setting it in front of me. "Try it. It's been years since you last had this. See if it still tastes the same as before." My mom's figure glowed softly under the gentle white light, achingly familiar. I noticed a few strands of gray hair peeking out at the top of her head, and a lump suddenly rose in my throat. When I married Ethan Moore, my mom had opposed it, not just because of social standing, but because she didn't want me marrying far away. She worried that if anything happened, there would be no one by my side. During my early years as a daughter-in-law in the Moore family, I had tried hard to imitate her, recreating the dishes she used to cook for me, yet no matter what, I could never make that same flavor. I used the steam rising from the bowl of noodles to hide my reddened eyes. "It's okay," I said softly. "From now on, I won't leave you again." Comforted by her, my mood eased considerably. On the morning of the 5th day of the new year, I woke up at 9. My mom had already opened the shop on the street. During the holiday season, there were many tourists coming to the town. My mom ran a small grocery store right at the head of the street. The weather was beautiful that day. By 10 in the morning, sunlight had already flooded the entire town, the air gentle, like it had been sweetened with honey. I had just reached the entrance of the shop and hadn't even had time to call out "Mom," when from inside, 2 figures, one big, one small, turned to look at me at the same time. "Mom!" Henry was the first to rush toward me. Before I could react, my whole body was wrapped in his tight embrace. He lifted his head to look at me, his big dark eyes shining with bright joy. "Mom, I missed you so much." Ethan Moore followed behind him, his demeanor calm and gentle, the corners of his lips still carrying a faint smile. Kelly. I was immediately left speechless, a sharp ache forming between my brows. I was truly shocked by the sudden appearance of the father and son, but right after that came a surge of irritation, crashing over me like a wave. What are you doing here? Ethan Moore didn't seem to care at all about the coldness in my tone. He even reached out and held my hand as if nothing had happened. Sorry, Kelly, there were too many guests at home these past few days. I came late. Just then, my mom came out from inside carrying a plate of fruit. It seemed she had already seen the two of them arrive earlier. I didn't know what Ethan Moore had said to persuade her, but now my mom's face was visibly brighter. Ethan, Henry, come inside and sit for a while. Thank you, Mom. Thank you, Grandma, Henry chimed in. In an instant, Henry turned into a well-behaved little boy, his words sweet and polite, nothing like the overly mature child he had been before. My mom was so thoroughly charmed that the smile never left her eyes, the fine lines at their corners seeming to bloom. She bent down in front of Henry. Who's such a good boy? Come here. Let Grandma give you a hug. This is a red envelope from Grandma. Wishing you good health in the new year. Wishing you peace and happiness, my mom said gently. Henry broke into a radiant smile again and obediently let her pull him into her arms. My mom really liked Henry. Even though this was their first time meeting, her smile was genuinely warm, spreading through the entire room. I had been home for several days now, yet this was the first time I had seen her this happy. I understood very clearly why Ethan Moore had come. After the call I hung up last night, he had rushed Henry here, driving all the way overnight. He thought I was just sulking, that I had gone back to my mom's place out of anger, and he hoped to use this to ease my temper. But there wasn't the slightest ripple in my heart, only layers upon layers of irritation wrapping tightly around me. Ethan Moore, I said, forcing myself to restrain my emotions. I had thought I had made myself perfectly clear to him last night. But he cut in before I could finish. Kelly, I've been driving for 5 straight hours. I'm really tired. He frowned slightly, his handsome face covered in a layer of weariness, as if deliberately putting it on display. Hearing that, my mom immediately exclaimed in distress and urged me to take the two of them home to rest first. How could I not see through Ethan Moore's act? But when I looked at my mom, who was overflowing with joy, I ultimately couldn't bear to dampen her mood. I led the father and son back to the house. One big, one small, they walked quietly behind me. Henry held Ethan Moore's hand, while Ethan seemed like he wanted to say something, then stopped himself. I saw through his intention, so as soon as we got home, I found an excuse to send Henry out of the room. I wanted to face Ethan Moore alone. I used to love him so deeply that just sitting quietly by his side was enough to make me happy. But now, just looking at his face filled me with disgust. So it turned out that loving someone could be that easy, and hating someone could come just as quickly. Ethan Moore, what exactly do you want? I felt a splitting headache, especially when facing him. Kelly, I don't want anything, he said softly. I just brought Henry to visit your mom. He looked at me and spoke slowly. Didn't you say before that Henry had never met his grandma? I laughed, a laugh full of mockery. I had mentioned this to him countless times, but he had always ignored it. Now he was suddenly acting proactive, as if he were the one with good intentions. I sneered, my gaze full of sarcasm. Ethan Moore pressed his lips together. Kelly, don't look at me like that. I'm being serious. Who needs your seriousness? I shot back. The arrival of Ethan Moore and Henry shattered the peaceful days I had been living. Yet I had to admit one thing. With them here, my mom truly was happier. She adored Henry. The love she once gave entirely to me now shifted fully onto her grandson, whom she grew more fond of, the more she looked at him. As for Ethan Moore, he never lacked performances of playing the role of a good son-in-law in front of my mom. Even though my mom didn't say anything outright, I could clearly sense that her attitude toward him had changed. The two of them stayed for 2 days. As the New Year holiday gradually came to an end, one morning my mom couldn't help quietly asking me, Kelly, when are you going back to the city? I've prepared some things for you. Don't forget to take them with you. Ethan Moore was there as well. He didn't say a word, only looked at me silently. Let's stay a few more days, I said. I want to spend a little more time with Mom. I didn't say it outright, but a flash of barely concealed delight crossed Ethan Moore's face. That evening, I planned to talk things through clearly with him. But instead, I unexpectedly overheard a conversation between him and Henry. "Dad, when are we going home?" Henry frowned, irritated, throwing the toy in his hand onto the floor. It was a toy my mom had given him. "I don't like it here at all." She didn't know how to win over children. She only saw that all the kids in town seemed to have toys like these, so she bought a whole pile for her grandson. When Henry first received them, he was very happy and even sweetly called out, "Thank you, Grandma," several times. Yet now he was saying that these things were boring, that he missed his paternal grandmother and Aunt Grace, and that he wanted to go to the amusement park with her again. Ethan Moore frowned slightly and gently coaxed his son. "Soon. Once your mom's anger has passed, our whole family will go home together. For these next few days, you have to behave and stop making your mom angry, okay?" Henry nodded reluctantly. I stood outside, and hearing this, I found it so ridiculous that I couldn't help letting out a cold laugh. Taking advantage of the good weather over the next few days, my mom suggested that I take Ethan Moore and Henry for a walk around the town. "Kelly was adorable when she was little," my mom said with a bright smile. "She used to run around the town playing. When it was time to eat, we'd have to chase all the way to the bridge just to find her." She cheerfully told stories from my childhood to Ethan Moore and Henry. Ethan Moore listened attentively, occasionally smiling faintly, his gentle gaze drifting toward me. On the stone-paved road winding through the town, Henry ran ahead, lively and energetic, turning his head back every few steps to make sure the two adults were keeping up. The new year had passed, and there were fewer people around town. Only a few figures passed by along the road. The scene was quiet and almost poetic. "Kelly," Ethan Moore spoke up first, breaking the silence, clearly trying to find a topic of conversation. "You've never told me about your childhood." I glanced at him. "I did tell you before. You just didn't like listening, so gradually I stopped talking about it." Now, for reasons I couldn't quite understand, he suddenly suggested, "Kelly, how about in the future every year we come back here and live for a while?" His eyes were calm and deep as he looked at me. But to my ears, those words were nothing more than a temporary pretense, meant only to placate my anger. Before I could respond, a cheerful shout suddenly came from ahead. "At Grace, Henry!" On the road in front of us, Grace Lang opened her arms wide as Henry came running toward her and threw himself into her embrace. Ethan Moore immediately frowned and instinctively turned to look at me. Seeing that I had no reaction, he quickly walked over to Henry. "Henry, get down!" Henry pouted and pushed himself out of Grace Lang's arms. Ethan Moore turned to her and asked, "Why are you here?" Grace Lang smiled gently. "I came here to travel. I heard you were here too. What a coincidence." Too much of a coincidence. China was so vast, yet Grace Lang had chosen this tiny town for her trip. Ethan Moore pressed his lips together and immediately looked at me. Following his gaze, Grace Lang noticed me as well, and the smile on her face grew even brighter. "Hello, Kelly. I really didn't expect to run into you here. Last time when you called Ethan, I didn't get the chance to wish you a happy new year." She deliberately brought up that New Year's Eve phone call. I could clearly see the smugness and flaunting pride in her eyes. "I heard it was because of me that the two of you misunderstood each other, and you got upset and went back to your mother's place." If that's really the case, then I truly feel terrible, Kelly. Ethan, Henry, and I, we're all just good friends. I was spending the new year alone and feeling too lonely, so they came to keep me company. Leaving you at home alone, I'm sincerely sorry. She put on an extremely earnest act, speaking gently, full of self-blame. Before I could respond, Henry tugged on her hand and said, "Aunt Grace, it's okay. Mom's always like that. She's not mad anymore, right, Mom?" He looked up at me, his innocent eyes filled with expectation. My gaze settled on his small figure, leaning closely against Grace Lang, an intimacy and reliance so familiar, the very thing I had spent years trying to build, yet never truly managed to obtain. I could never obtain it after all, but fortunately, at this point, I no longer yearned for it. Am I angry? Not really, not to that extent. After all, people like her, Kelly, someone who can be so enthusiastically devoted to taking care of another woman's child while also showing such concern for another woman's husband, aren't exactly common. I smiled faintly, my tone gentle yet laden with implication. Grace Lang clearly caught the sarcasm in my words. The smile on her lips stiffened slightly, but she quickly recovered her bright expression and lowered her head to respond to Henry's question. Henry, in his innocence, suggested that Grace Lang come along with us to walk around. Mom grew up in this town. She knows the roads really well. She could even be our tour guide, he said. Ethan Moore frowned, about to speak, but Grace Lang had already smiled softly. Is that so? I'd feel bad troubling you, Kelly. From that moment on, Grace Lang followed closely behind our group. Perhaps she was still holding on to the mockery in my earlier words, because she deliberately and discreetly isolated me from the other three. She made no effort to hide her closeness with Ethan Moore and Henry, displaying it bit by bit right in front of me. Ethan, this place is really beautiful. Hurry and help me take a picture with Henry, she said, linking arms with Henry as they stood by the old stone bridge, her movements natural and practiced. She used a familiar tone to give instructions, prompting Ethan Moore to lift the phone and take photos of the two of them. Grace Lang then suggested again, let's take a picture of the three of us together. Her gaze swept around before finally settling on me. Kelly, would you mind helping us take one? Ethan Moore immediately turned to look at me, as if he were about to say something, but I smiled and spoke first. Sure. Grace Lang's smile instantly brightened, while Ethan Moore frowned slightly, his eyes lingering on me with visible concern. After I finished taking the photo for the three of them, Ethan Moore suddenly said, Kelly, let's take a family photo. No need, I replied coolly. I don't like taking pictures. My response left him momentarily speechless, his expression darkening. That evening, Ethan Moore came to knock on my bedroom door. Kelly, what's going on? He pressed his lips together and spoke softly. About Grace. She didn't come because I called her. It was rare for him to take the initiative to explain himself. Of course I knew that. Ethan Moore understood perfectly well where the rift between us truly lay. At a time like this, he would never have allowed Grace Lang to appear openly in front of me. I know, I replied, because I was the one who called her. Ethan Moore lifted his head, deep suspicion flashing through his eyes. I met his gaze directly, my own reflection mirrored in his pupils, the corner of my lips curling into a cold smile. Ethan Moore, do you want to know how I've lived all these years? Every time you took Henry out with Grace Lang? His face went pale. Clearly, he recalled everything that had happened earlier that day. We were supposed to be the real family of three, yet the ease and familiarity with which Grace Lang blended in with him and our son made me, someone who should have belonged, feel like the extra one. And that was when I was standing right there in front of them. There were times when I wasn't present at all. I didn't know whether, when outsiders misunderstood, Ethan Moore would choose to stay silent and let it be taken as truth, just like that New Year's Eve post. Ethan Moore tried to explain, but facts remained facts. No matter how carefully they were concealed, even the smallest traces would eventually surface. I looked at him calmly. Don't worry, I'm not angry. Henry and Grace Lang are so close, if she became his stepmother, I'd actually be happy for him. At that point, Kelly, Ethan Moore cut me off. His deep, dark eyes seemed to ignite, the look in them carrying a damp sheen mixed with anger. I've never once thought about divorcing you. Then am I supposed to keep watching you and Grace Lang? I shot back. Watching the two of you in the same frame with our son? Ethan Moore, don't be so greedy. Don't try to have one thing without letting go of the other. Kelly, the person I've loved from beginning to end has always been you. But I don't love you anymore. Ethan Moore suddenly fell silent. The color drained from his face, as if water were slowly leaking out of a cracked vessel, drop by drop until nothing was left. I could clearly see the shattered, damp light in his eyes. Then, I don't mind saying it again, I continued calmly. Ethan Moore, I don't love you anymore. When I married Ethan Moore, I once believed I would spend my entire life by his side. No matter how the world gossiped, I firmly believed that choosing him was something I would never regret. But I had forgotten that some roads cannot be walked forever by one person alone. I had once felt his gentleness and affection toward me, but they never lasted. They were like charity handed out to a beggar, given generously when he was in a good mood, withheld completely when he wasn't. I had deceived myself like that for so many years. And what about Henry? Ethan Moore asked hoarsely. He's our child. Are you going to abandon him too? He looked at me with pain-filled eyes. I didn't answer, because Henry was not mine alone. He was the heir of the Moore family, and compared to me, I believed he would willingly choose Grace Lang as his mother instead. Ethan Moore didn't believe it. That night, he left the house in a daze. The next morning, Henry insisted on going to the other side of town to play. I didn't go with them. You two go ahead, I said. As soon as the words left my mouth, Henry skipped out happily toward Grace Lang, who was already waiting. Aunt Grace? Mom's not coming. Let's go play. Ethan Moore watched Henry chattering excitedly beside Grace Lang. For the first time, that sight felt glaring and painfully sharp to him. He still followed them out. I thought it would be the same as always. Without me, the three of them would enjoy themselves. But I didn't expect that just an hour later, Ethan Moore would come back dragging Henry, who was sobbing uncontrollably. My son's face was flushed red, tears and snot all over, while Grace Lang was nowhere to be seen. Dad is the worst! Henry cried so hard he could barely breathe, his voice hoarse with anger. Ethan Moore's face was dark, his expression cold, like a storm about to break. This was the first time I had ever seen father and son argue so fiercely. I was genuinely surprised. What happened? I asked Ethan Moore. He didn't answer, so I turned to Henry. Unexpectedly, the moment I reached out, the boy slapped my hand away. I don't need you. Henry! Ethan Moore barked sharply, his voice filled with anger. I still didn't understand what had happened. A few minutes later, I finally pieced together the whole story. It turned out that when Ethan Moore and Henry first went out with Grace Lang, everything had been fine, until Grace Lang smiled brightly and took out a piece of freshly bought buckwheat cake, holding it out in front of Ethan Moore. Try it. I just took a bite. It's really soft and fragrant. A small bite mark was still clearly visible on the cake. Ethan Moore stared at it for several seconds, then suddenly raised his hand and knocked it hard to the ground. Disgusting. Grace Lang staggered, her face turning pale with shock. Ethan, Henry rushed over to support her. Dad, what's wrong with you? Why did you push Aunt Grace? It was at that exact moment that Ethan Moore suddenly realized the problem with Grace Lang's recent behavior. Grace Lang had crossed the line. Ethan Moore forced down his emotions and said to her in a low voice, Don't follow us anymore. Your presence here is already disturbing us. Grace Lang widened her eyes, unable to believe what she was hearing. Henry immediately shouted in protest, Dad, what nonsense are you talking about? How could Aunt Grace be a disturbance? We've always had so much fun playing with her. Every single word from his son was like a knife stabbing straight into Ethan Moore's heart. Those words that once reassured him now turned, at this very moment, into the most cruel form of mockery. He clenched his fists, his entire body seeming to be shrouded in a dark, oppressive fog, cold and suffocating. So that's how it is. I shook my head lightly and let out a soft sigh. Seeing Henry still crying pitifully, my heart softened, and I decided to coax him a little. Henry, don't cry anymore. I don't need you to pretend to be nice, he shouted back. If you hadn't insisted on staying here, none of this would have happened. This was beyond anything I had expected. I never imagined that Henry would lash out at me so fiercely today. Were these really words a 5-year-old child could say to his own mother? I lowered my head and met his reddened eyes, filled with blame and resentment. That look was far too familiar. Yet at this moment, I truly didn't deserve it. What had I even done? Ethan Moore finally couldn't hold back anymore. He shouted sternly, Henry, what are you saying? I'm telling the truth. Henry cried, both aggrieved and furious. Without Mom, you and I have way more fun together. Ever since I was little, Mom left me at Grandma's place. She's never fulfilled her responsibility as a mother. I like Aunt Grace. I don't like Mom. Hearing those words, I froze. For a moment, I didn't even know how to react. Ethan Moore immediately grabbed his son and demanded harshly, Who taught you to say things like that? Henry fell silent, lips pressed tightly together, his eyes still red. A numbness suddenly spread through my entire body. I felt exhausted, But right after that came an unexpected sense of relief. If things had already reached this point, then so be it. I squatted down in front of Henry. Into that gaze I poured everything I had: love, pain, helplessness, and wariness. In the end, I only said one sentence. "Actually, I don't like you that much either." Henry stared at me in shock. I smiled at him gently. "So from now on, let's not see each other again." "Kelly, don't go," Ethan Moore called out, his voice trembling. I turned to him and said calmly, "Ethan Moore, you too can leave now." Ethan Moore had once thought that bringing Henry along would be the reason to keep me from leaving. But in the end, it was Henry himself who became the final ending of the relationship between Ethan Moore and me. Back then, when Ethan Moore agreed with the elders of the Moore family to bring Henry back to the ancestral home to be raised, had he ever imagined that years later, that very decision would turn into the blade that severed our bond? I had never betrayed Ethan Moore, nor had I ever betrayed Henry. On the contrary, they were the ones who betrayed me. But fortunately, in the end, I was able to break free from the shackles that bound me. The day Ethan Moore took Henry away happened to be the 8th day of the new year. My mom knew nothing about what had happened between Ethan Moore and me. She even kindly reminded him that if he and Henry had time, they should remember to come back and visit. Ethan Moore glanced at me, forcing himself to hide the bitterness in his smile. "Okay." Henry sat in the back seat of the car, the window rolled up, blocking his figure and face from view. He was still sulking, probably waiting for me to come and comfort him like I always used to. But this time, I truly didn't care anymore. I told Ethan Moore, "Remember to sign the divorce papers. This is the last thing I ask you to do for me. Don't disappoint me." Ethan Moore didn't say anything, only his eyes reddened slightly. "I can't keep you anymore, can I?" I looked straight into his eyes and nodded gently. "That's right." 1 month later, Ethan Moore and I officially divorced. Half a year after that, my mother finally found out. She was stunned, unable to understand why I had made such a decision. I didn't tell her about the years of things I had endured. I only replied calmly that I no longer loved him. My mother sighed with regret. But as time passed, she didn't ask anything more. The reason she stopped asking was that from then on, every year during winter break or summer vacation, Ethan Moore would bring Henry back to visit her. It was just that each time I was never there, for one reason or another. After the divorce, Ethan Moore returned to the ancestral home. I heard that he had a huge argument with his mother, the old matriarch of the Moore family. After that, he took Henry back to live with him and raised the boy himself. I once thought he would marry Grace Slang, but for reasons unknown, she went abroad again. Ethan Moore deleted all the old photos on social media that had once captured moments of him, Henry, and Grace Lang. Instead, he set his profile picture to an old photo of me and him from many years ago. Many people noticed this change and began messaging me one after another to tease me. Their tone and attitude were exactly the same as before, back when they had flattered the story of Ethan Moore and Grace Lang celebrating New Year's Eve together. The flood of messages annoyed me. In the end, I pinned a cold status update at the top. "Don't bother me, we're divorced." Everyone was shocked. Only a small number of people, those who knew a bit of the inside story, weren't too surprised. As for Henry, at first he didn't know that Ethan Moore and I had divorced. After he went back to live with his father, he often asked, "Dad, where's Mom? Why hasn't Mom come back yet?" At the beginning, Ethan Moore stayed silent. Later, when the questions became too frequent, he finally said that Mom wouldn't be coming back anymore. "Why?" Henry asked. Ethan Moore didn't answer. Feeling wronged and confused, Henry secretly took his father's phone and sent me a voice message. "Mom, when are you coming back?" Later on, Henry gradually came to understand what the words breaking up and divorce meant. I heard that he cried for a long time, making a fuss all day, insisting on seeing me, but in the end, he still didn't get to see me. And then, eventually, every winter break and summer vacation, Ethan Moore would bring the boy back to the small town from years ago. For Henry, those holidays gradually became the most anticipated times of the year, just like I had once been, back then. What hurts deeper? Walking away or staying and slowly losing yourself? Love and Lies story.